Hey everyone, welcome back to the Michael Lofton Show on Reason and Theology. Pope Leo XIV is in trouble again with some of the critics, this time over some comments that he made about Pope Francis being in heaven and praying for the church from heaven in relation to him saying that. This is about maybe the third time he said that. That is actually not the controversy. The controversy is whenever he said this, he spoke of Pope Francis returning to the Father's house. And some people have interpreted that as a heretical statement because they think it entails reincarnation or the pre-existence of souls. Both of those are condemned positions within the Catholic Church. And so we're going to talk a little bit about it, see whether or not this is something to really be concerned about, or if the critics are maybe being a little overly critical and maybe reading too much into what the Pope said. We're going to take a look at that, as well as a situation going on with the Eastern Orthodox. We're going to shift gears after the Pope Leo XIV question, and we're going to take a look at something where a bishop was just removed from ministry, mainly because of his practice of rebaptizing converts to the Catholic Church. Hotly debated topic within Eastern Orthodoxy, different practices here among the Eastern Orthodox. But the Patriarch of Constantinople has weighed in on the question in relation to a Cypriot bishop. And so we're going to talk about that and briefly address the situation with rebaptism within Eastern Orthodoxy. Okay, so before we dive in, though, let me remind y'all, hit that subscribe button, hit the like button. It goes a long way. I would really appreciate that support for the channel. Let me go ahead and share my screen. And, the first time I saw somebody making this criticism, I've seen a number of people. It was from Father David Nix. Now, I can't seem to find where he said this because, he's got a lot of posts, but I know for sure he said it previously. Maybe some of y'all can send me a copy of it. But effectively, what Father David Nix was saying, and by the way, for those of y'all who are not familiar with him, Father David Nix is a hermit and Catholic priest. He takes the position that Pope Francis wasn't the Pope. And right now for Pope Leo, I guess presumably he accepts that Pope Leo is the Pope. I don't know, but it does appear he's very critical of him. And one of the criticisms that he had was in relation to a tweet from Pope Leo XIV. Let me maybe first show you that tweet and then again show you what perhaps Father Nix's concern was among other people. He, I'm not picking on him or anything. He just represents what a lot of people were saying by way of criticism of the Pope. So I'm just using him as an example. So here's what Pope Leo XIV said on his Twitter. I can already tell right now, papal tweets are going to be a source of contention for years to come, right? In an age of plenty of online controversies, I think these are going to spark endless debates from what I can tell already. He says, today in a special way, we remember our beloved Pope Francis with deep gratitude, who exactly 1 month ago returned to the Father's house. He accompanies us in praise for the church from heaven. Now, this was the third time he said that Pope Francis is in heaven. First time I pointed out, some people were in denial, and they tried to gaslight me, and they were like, Michael, he didn't actually say that. He just said that he felt his presence from heaven, but he's not actually saying that he's in heaven. And they were doing all these kinds of twists and turns and Neo from the Matrix dodges to try to, avoid the fact that, yeah, he's clearly saying that Pope Francis is in heaven. Like it or love it, or hate it maybe, but, either way, that's what he's saying. People were trying to dodge it and play, but yeah, you can't do that anymore. He again, clearly says Pope Francis is in heaven. And is praying for the church from heaven. Again, some people may love that, others are going to hate it. But you know what? That's not actually the controversy this time. That was a controversy a few weeks ago, or like a week and a half ago, or I don't know, the first time he said it. The new controversy, though, was he's saying that Pope Francis returned to the Father's house. And so, Father Dave Nix and a few others online, their concern was, well, look, how does it even make sense to talk about him returning to the Father's house? Return would assume that maybe there was some kind of pre-existence of the soul, which is condemned in the Catholic Church. Or Reincarnation, also condemned and contested or refuted by First Corinthians, and so from the Bible. And of course, there's no real way in which you could speak of return to the Father's house in any kind of way that suggests prior to a person's birth here on earth, they were somehow with God. I think maybe at the most what a person can do is say that, everybody has existed in the knowledge of God from all eternity. I mean, God knows who he's going to create, right? Maybe he hasn't created them just yet, but he knows who he's going to create in eternity past. He already knew that. He hasn't created them yet, but in eternity past, he knew who he was going to create. Maybe only in that sense you could say return, but it's not really a meaningful way to speak of, that concept. And so, I don't exactly know what's meant by this language, return to the Father's house, unless again maybe one is just saying, everybody starts out in the mind of God, and in that sense we're returning to our origin or something. I don't know. I've never been able to make a whole lot of sense out of this language, but as some people are pointing out, well, look, this is hardly a controversy, because it's not like Pope Leo is the only one who's ever said this, right? And so, what some people are doing is they're pointing out, well, wait, why wasn't this a controversy when other popes said it, right? And hey, they have a point. So here's John Paul II, Mother Teresa of Calcutta, who yesterday returned to the Father's house. That was the September 6th of 1997. Scholastica says this is just pure nitpicking. Yeah, it kind of sounds like it to me, in my opinion, to be honest. I wouldn't make too much about the language return to the Father's house. Like, I wouldn't read into that some kind of dogma. But some people, they really got their microscope out. They're looking for something. They're wanting to criticize some things, right? And look, hey, I've already made some criticisms of Pope Leo the 14th. Hopefully, they were constructive in nature. I already have some, just as I did of Pope Francis. But look, I want to be fair to him, right? And I kind of think this might be one of those things where people are perhaps not being that fair. John Paul II said, Mother Teresa returned to the Father's house. Elsewhere, he said, my venerable predecessor, the servant of God, Paul VI, who returned to the Father's house precisely on the Feast of the Transfiguration. That was on the 6th of August, 1999. There were no, uproars at the time of people saying, hey, what's going on? It sounds like John Paul II believes in reincarnation or something like that. At the time, the only real critics that you really had of John Paul II were your SSPX guys, right? This one I don't think is a related quote, in my opinion. I don't think it's the same concept, but they said this is from Ratzinger on April 8th of 2005. We can be sure that our beloved Pope is standing today at the window of the Father's house, that he sees us and blesses us. Yeah, but I don't see where he's saying like that he returned to him. That was kind of the point. Just because he says Father's house doesn't mean he's saying return to the Father's house. Not that Ratzinger would have a problem with that language anyway. I'm just saying I don't know if that one actually matches, but after that, there's Pope Francis on November 4th of 2013. We remember our brother cardinals and bishops from around the world who have returned to the Father's house during this last year. So again, there wasn't an uproar at the time, but now some people are expressing a great deal of concern and perhaps maybe reading a little bit too much into this. Yeah, okay, maybe they could be a little bit more precise. Maybe Leo the 14th, he can maybe avoid that language just in case some people are going to get confused. Personally, I would avoid it. I would never use that kind of language just because I know it's open to misinterpretation. So I don't know if it was a good idea for John Paul II or for Francis or Leo the 14th to use that language. Personally, I would avoid it. But, I guess you could see it in some kind of Orthodox sense if they just mean like, in God's foreknowledge. But then it's not a very meaningful way to speak of returning to the Father's house. So yeah, I just kind of feel like drop that language. But yeah, I wouldn't just make an entire deal out of this and say, well, okay, he's for sure assuming a heresy or reincarnation or preexistence of souls or something like that. I think that's a little too much. Daisy says, stop it with your judging. You're probably not even a Catholic. The devil is always. The devil is always. That's not a good way to finish your sentence, Daisy. That's a really bad way to finish. You might want to finish that sentence to say the devil is always. Does it sound very orthodox? I get what you're trying to say. You're trying to say that people need to stop it with their constant judging and nitpicking and stuff like that. I think that's what you're trying to say. Okay. So that's the situation with Pope Leo the 14th. Again, I feel it's blown out of the proportion. Cut the guy some slack, give him a break, and let's also be consistent. If you didn't complain about this with other popes, probably shouldn't complain about it with this one. All right. So let's also take a look at another situation here with Eastern Orthodoxy, briefly shifting gears. And let me remind all of y'all who are just now tuning in and joining the live stream, hit the subscribe button and the like button. So let's take a look at an article here from Union of Orthodox Journalists. One second. Union of Orthodox Journalists, an article that they just posted. Cypriot Synod, so Cyprus, the Synod of the bishops of Cyprus, deposed bishop following letter from Patriarch Bartholomew of Constantinople. And here's the bishop that was deposed. The ecumenical patriarch demanded disciplinary action against a Cypriot hierarch who insisted on rebaptizing Protestants, converting to Eastern Orthodoxy. So in Eastern Orthodoxy, there's different perspectives. This is a controversy that goes back to the 3rd century between Pope Stephen and Cyprian. And there was a lot of back and forth. There were different practices. North African bishops and Cyprian were rebaptizing people. And Pope Stephen was like, no, you can't do that. And the African bishops were saying, but we have an apostolic practice that lets us do this. And Stephen's like, no, that's wrong. And I've spoken and I have the keys and I'm the Pope. So y'all need to listen to me. And so there was a big controversy there. Of course, in the Catholic Church, what won the day was Stephen's position. So people are not rebaptized. So if you have somebody who's baptized and then they go astray when they come back to the church, they're not rebaptized. Or if they're baptized in a different community and then come into the Catholic Church, they're not rebaptized as long as it was a valid baptism. For Eastern Orthodox, there's different practices. They will reconfirm you. They will repeat that sacrament. All of them. So if you're a confirmed and baptized Catholic, they'll repeat your confirmation. If you're going to be received into the Eastern Orthodox Church from Catholicism, some of them will also rebaptize you. It just kind of depends on who you're talking to, which Orthodox jurisdiction it is. Different bishops, different patriarchs, different synods, they have different practices. So some of them will accept your baptism as a Protestant or as a Catholic. None of them will accept your confirmation, though. They'll always repeat that. But baptism, they may or may not accept it. There's been a big debate here in Eastern Orthodoxy on the question. There have been different practices in Eastern Orthodoxy on the question. Usually they would not rebaptize Catholics or even Protestants, but there has been a big push on part of some Orthodox to do that. And it's become such an issue and a divisive issue. Some of Orthodox would try to downplay it and say it's not that big of a deal, but if you talk to actual Eastern Orthodox behind closed doors, they'll tell you this is a big deal. I remember seeing a video from Metropolitan Callistus Ware, who's actually had the honor of interviewing before he passed away. And he said in an interview he was hoping that the Holy and Great Council of Crete, I think that was 2018, would fix this, would resolve the issue. But of course, it never did so. Give me 1 second. So the Metropolitan was saying that he was hoping that the Council of Crete would address the issue and solve this controversy because he felt it was a massive deal. So again, for any Eastern Orthodox who tries to downplay it, says it's not a big deal, they're contradicted by their most famous Orthodox voice in the last 100 years. Um, whether they like that or not, that's the reality. And of course, the Holy Council of Crete came and went, and it didn't do anything. It didn't solve the issue. Let me double check. I think that was in 2018. Holy and Great Council. You can find their documents. Oh, it's 2016. I'm sorry. It's been so long. Give me 1 second, y'all. Sorry, I keep getting interruptions here. 2018 or 2016, if you look at your screen here, you can see some of the documents. The Holy and Great Council, Pentecost 2016. It had a number of the Eastern Orthodox there. The Russian Orthodox were not represented, and so some will consider it authoritative, others won't. And let me double check. I believe it was in Crete in 2016. Yes. Now, the thing here is Metropolitan Callistus Ware was hoping that the Holy and Great Council would deal with it, because this council was about 100 years in the making. And so pretty much all of the big controversies in Eastern Orthodoxy, for a good 100 or so years, people were hoping this council, whenever it actually is convoked, would address all of the problems in Eastern Orthodoxy. Well, almost none of the problems were addressed, let alone resolved from it. But one of them was the rebaptism situation. And so, for better or worse, it wasn't addressed. It continues to be a hotly debated topic in Eastern Orthodoxy. With that in mind, it says the removal of Metropolitan Tsikos of Paphos came after direct intervention by Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew, who in a letter to Archbishop George of Cyprus demanded that the disobedient bishop be brought to order. This was reported by the Cypriot outlet Philonews, which published relevant documents. A central point of conflict was the Metropolitan's firm stance on rebaptizing issues who have been previously baptized in Protestant denominations. And usually what they'll do is they'll cite various canons from the early church for this. There are different canons that they hold to, some that allow for rebaptism, some that don't. And there's different ways in which they try to explain that. The Patriarch of Constantinople considers this an archaic practice, maintaining that chrismation or confirmation is sufficient for receiving Protestants into the Orthodox Church. I think that just pushes the problem one step further, one step down the road, because the same reason why you wouldn't rebaptize people is the same reason why you shouldn't reconfirm people. But all of them will reconfirm you. So there's still going to be a problem with repeating of sacraments no matter where you go in Eastern Orthodoxy. But some will receive your baptism and not treat you as a pagan when you enter the church. Others will not accept your baptism if you convert from Protestantism to Catholicism to Eastern Orthodoxy. They will treat you as a pagan, an unbaptized pagan, and they will baptize you, and they will say that's your first baptism. Okay. So Phil News published a complaint from an American professor of Cypriot origin who was unable to get married in Paphos due to conflicting practices between the Ecumenical Patriarch and the Metropolitan of Paphos regarding the reception of non-Orthodox Christians. The Protestant bride had received chrismation at the Church of St. Spiridon in the New York under the Ecumenical Patriarchate. After 9 months of catechesis of being given an Orthodox name. However, the Paphos Metropolitus deemed chrismation insufficient and insisted on full baptism. After about 9 months of catechism, a wife received an Orthodox name and underwent chrismation, the professor wrote in his complaint. A copy of the chrismation certificate was sent to the Paphos Metropolis metropolis. But when the couple tried to register for a church wedding in Cyprus, they were told that full baptism would be required. So don't let Eastern Orthodox lie to you. There are some people who will lie to you and just will tell you that um, this is no big deal in the Eastern Orthodoxy. You won't be denied any of the sacraments. That's just not true. I know Eastern Orthodox priests who have been denied sacraments, who are not allowed to concelebrate. I know plenty of people who are denied sacraments. Here's another example. Again, don't let people downplay this. By the way, somebody in the chat is saying the title is a clickbait. That is not true, and I encourage you to Google what clickbait means. I suspect you don't know the proper definition. The situation became even more complicated because all wedding arrangements had already been made. The banquet hall was reserved and paid for, invitations sent, and a certificate of singleness obtained from the parish of the Three Hierarchs in Chicago. When the professor spoke with the Paphos Metropolitus by phone, he was told that Metropolitan Tychikos wished to meet his wife in person. Upon learning that she was not in Cyprus, the professor was referred to another priest who told him Protestants do not have valid sacraments, so their baptisms are invalid. Again, some Orthodox are going to say they believe that to be the case. Others are going to say, no, their baptisms are valid, and so you don't have to repeat those. Also, whether or not you have to repeat your marriage vows, kind of a different question. Whether or not they'll accept your marriage, or if they think that you're living in adultery, different question. The professor filed complaints with the Archdiocese of the Ecumenical Patriarch in New York and the metropolis of Chicago, where the rebaptism requirement was deemed unjustified. The matter eventually reached the Ecumenical Patriarch, who sent a strong protest to Archbishop George of Cyprus. Again, I got to give it to the Eastern Orthodox. Hate them or love them, right or wrong, at least they're willing to do some discipline. Gosh, I have not seen, analogous discipline being done in a long time in the Catholic Church. So again, right or wrong, hate them or love them, at least they're willing to do some serious discipline in situations like this. It says in it, the Patriarch expressed astonishment and indignation, calling Metropolitan Tychikos, however you pronounce it, views conservative and entirely outdated. He also noted that the Metropolitan spoke disrespectfully and inappropriately about the Reverend Ecumenical Throne. Not uncommon. I remember within the Patriarchate of Constantinople, when I was Eastern Orthodox, plenty of Greek Orthodox were saying that Patriarch Bartholomew is a heretic, kind of like you have a lot of Catholics saying, Francis is a heretic and stuff like that. That was very common in Eastern Orthodoxy as well. The Patriarch further warned that such incidents contribute to isolationism and jeopardize our sensitive relations with other Christian denominations and churches. Well, yeah, if you consider them unbaptized pagans, I'm certain that will impact discussions with that group, right? Your beatitude, convinced as we are here at the Fanar that the traditional relations between our sisters churches must continue as before, because Patriarch of Constantinople was really big into ecumenism. For the common good, something we are sure you and your holy brothers desire, we ask you to bring Metropolitan Tychikos to order and forbid him from disrupting the exemplary relations between the ancient churches of Constantinople and Cyprus, the letter stated. Reporting the situation to the Holy Synod, Archbishop George remarked, because of this complaint, we have been discredited before the Orthodox Church in America and American governmental authorities. As previously reported by the Union of Orthodox Journalists, the Holy Synod and the Church of Cyprus has removed the Metropolitan from the administration of the Metropolis of Paphos. So he has been removed from ministry for rebaptizing and requiring the rebaptism of Protestants. Contrast this with someone like Father Peter Ayres, who very openly advocates for rebaptism position. In fact, I remember contacting him when I was looking into converting to Eastern Orthodoxy, and he told me that, I would need to be rebaptized. And I said, so, hey, if I go to the local Greek Orthodox church and they just receive me by chrismation and accept my baptism, would I not be considered Orthodox? And he didn't seem to think I would be considered Orthodox. And he told me that I need to drive 8 hours to the closest place that would closest Russian church that would rebaptize me, which of course I didn't do, but this was a position that he advised me. And it appears that he advises people to be rebaptized, as in this particular case. So contrast Patriarch of Constantinople with, for instance, this from, again, very popular online priest, Father Peter Ayres. All right, here we go. He rambles for a little bit and answers the question right around here, around the 2 minute mark. And he says, yes. Somebody said they couldn't hear it. Okay, let's try it again. Try it one more time here. Thank y'all for letting me know. Try it one more.
Infant baptized by Catholic, grew up Protestant. Do I need to be baptized to become a member of the Orthodox Church? Pardon my ignorance. Hey, Brian, thank you.
All right, skipping forward past the rambling. Here we go.
But I think it would be really good if you read the literature we've produced on this. It's a massive book of 450 pages. Maybe that's too big for you, but there's also a pamphlet on reception and on being baptized into the church. And so the answer, as you would expect, is that you need to be baptized. And why do you need to be baptized? Because
all right, so he goes on to explain why, but very clearly he's telling Catholics, or even now in this case, somebody who was baptized a Catholic but then lived as a Protestant, tells them, yes, you need to be baptized. So in other words, this is an unbaptized pagan in his eyes. So Catholics are not really even, they're not even Christian. They're unbaptized pagans from this mentality. Whereas other Orthodox would not see Catholics or even Protestants in that way, and they would see them as baptized Christians, but maybe lacking full communion with the Orthodox Church, kind of borrowing from the language of Catholicism and the notion of full versus partial communion. So this is a pretty big deal. Again, within Eastern Orthodoxy. And again, a lot of people just try to downplay it. But as you can see here, it's big enough of a deal for a bishop to be removed. So the next time somebody tells you online it's not a big deal, you could just point to their own synods that are starting to depose some of these people, and their own bishops who are starting to speak out against this, even in the United States. I remember there was a letter by a noteworthy bishop in the United States who said Father Peter Ayres is wrong on this and censured him, and wrote a letter to his flock against Father Peter Ayres, because Father Peter Ayres is kind of spearheading this rebaptism view. Not that he understands it as rebaptism. He thinks that it's not rebaptism, that this person is being baptized for the first time. But for anybody who has a correct understanding of the sacraments, this would be rebaptism. So again, huge controversy going on here, but I have to at least give it to the Orthodox for saying, you know what, we're actually going to stand up and do something about this, and we're going to start deposing people who take this deviant practice. So maybe we'll see more from the Orthodox on that matter, and they'll start to rein in some of these people. Anyways, hope you found this helpful, productive. If you did, let me know. Put your thoughts there in the comment section. Please hit that like button and the subscribe button. I would really appreciate your support. That's going to do it for today. I will see you all tomorrow. God bless.